time I spoke with John Kaiser was 1 year ago, when perhaps a cynical investor may have argued that the rare earth sector was burning a little too hot and was at risk of fizzling out or fading the way some metals du jour do when speculators and investors pile on rapidly and drive up the price. A year later today, the rare earth sector is burning hotter than ever, and John is here to explain what's going on. Thanks, John.
Last year, when everybody was concerned this is a bubble, the dozen or so companies that I followed had a market cap of about $2 billion. And what were then the FOB spot prices? They had measured in the ground in situ value of about $60 billion worth of rare earths. Since then, the market cap of this cluster has expanded to about $8 billion, wow, increased about 4 times. But in addition, in conjunction with the significant price rises we have seen for FOB prices for the rare earths outside of China, and the additional resource estimates that some of these companies have put out, they are now sitting on an in situ resource in the order of somewhere between $300 and $500 billion. So the asset base they're sitting on is extraordinary. The valuation is still relatively minute. To put all of these into production would probably have a capital cost of $5 billion. And given all the fuss that we are hearing now about how China is curtailing exports in order to foster its own domestic industry and, and furthermore technology transfer, there's a very simple solution. Get the best ones into production and then see what happens. And in fact, there is a race underway now, and any one of these could stumble along the way. And the market is sort of pricing, well, we need to bet on all of them because we don't know which ones are going to finish.
Have you seen any, is there an analogy in the resource sector? I mean, you've been doing this in this sector for 25 years. Have you seen anything like this before?
Now, when I started in the 80s, the junior sector was completely obsessed with gold and maybe silver a little bit. Base metals were not very interesting. Not until the beginning of this century did people start paying attention to copper, nickel, zinc, and all this. Industrial metals, specialty metals, nobody had any interest in because they were very obscure. And in case of specialty metals, there were a few very significant deposits, and Mountain Pass was one of them in California, which Molycorp is now putting back in production, which totally dominate the supply for those metals, which had relatively small markets. And China, even back then in the 80s, was a major supplier of a lot of metals such as tungsten and tin and antimony, so that developing a project outside of China or outside these super high grade, large deposit was just not worth anybody's bother. That has changed today.
I mean, what we're seeing now is the West sort of waking up to this reality of China's near total dominance of the market, and there's an upside to that, cheap metals. But when we see the saber rattling that just happened, let's say with Japan, and has happened elsewhere, and certainly will continue to, there's a real concern there that, well, while cheap metals are one thing, having control of strategic metals is a totally different subject and of vital importance.
Yeah, well, when the Cold War ended, the world got lulled into this idea that now we are a global economy, metals are going to be produced where they are cheapest to be produced, and buyers from everywhere in the world will go to a central commodities pool, and the buyer who pays the most will get it. That idea is now fragmenting. So now we have this interesting problem that a certain key materials, such as rare earths, come only from China, and China right now is in the process of really curtailing its own production, and there's less and less available outside. So now they're really thinking hard about security of supply. It's healthy for the world to have metals, critical metals coming from a variety of places, which is why even if the economics does not work perfect or is hard to predict because of volatility in prices, there is incentive even at the government level to make sure deposits go into production in many places around the world. And even the Chinese want that. They don't really want to use rare earths as a tool to bully the rest of the world into submission. They would rather just beat them hands down through producing products cheaper than the rest of the world.
Well, they make more money in the long run that way, right? By producing rare earths and then producing a final product, as opposed to producing a concentrate and selling it abroad.
Yeah, one thing people forget is that China has a population base of 1.3 billion. This is China's own biggest market. Countries like Japan have a much smaller population. The United States is only 350 million. So growth to a large degree has to come from trade elsewhere. China does not necessarily need trade with the rest of the world. It does right now. It's very much dependent on it, but its future lies in its own population and perhaps a trading relationship with India, all of Asia becoming the new powerhouse economic zone 20 years and beyond.
Is it too late for investors to get on board here?
Not really. What we saw last year when these stocks went from nothing up 1,000% in some cases, they were awakening from a slumber where the market was not aware of rare earths, where there was very little value. Some of them didn't even realize that they had a significant rare earth story. In the last 3-4 months, we've seen a lot of capital raised, about $600–700 million on top of the $500 million that Linus raised early last year. And these companies have advanced their projects substantially. They are now at a pricing where, except for the lead ones like Linus and Molycorp, which actually achieved $3 billion valuations, which are somewhat ahead of where one might expect that to be. So. The other ones that are in this $200 million to $500 million range, they still have room to double or quadruple from here, assuming that the end users do realize that this is a game about opportunity cost. Whoever it is that does not have a secure supply of rare earths is going to have to give up with the commercialization potential of products.
So what you're saying is that in the longer term, there's room for a lot more growth.
That's right. In Hong Kong, during the Roskill conference, a Japanese organization did a presentation where they show the demand for rare earths going to over 400,000 tons annually by 2030. Wow. Right now, everybody's just worrying about 2015. Well, most of the mines that are on the drawing board will not be into production before then. And if a lot of these green, clean energy type technologies continue to be implemented, by the time this stuff is online, there'll be all kinds of plans for additional rare earth supply that will easily absorb what these mines are all capable of.
Let's talk about the size of this sector, because it's actually really small, and that probably comes to bear on how short-lived this could be. Once the market is satisfied, in other words, once several companies do come to production and come to market with an adequate supply of rare earths, this whole issue will be solved. But how fast is the market growing in the meantime?
China's actually shrinking the market. At that Hong Kong presentation, the representative from the Chinese Society of Rare Earths suggested that target output for 2009 was 127,000 tons, and target output for 2010 is 90,000 tons, which explains why we have seen the severe cutback in the quotas, down to 30,000 from what was about 50,000 before. And what's happening is they are consolidating their own industry, getting rid of the messy ones. They are shutting down on smuggling. I suspect there's been 30,000 tons of material smuggled out of China so that the government does not get its export duties. So in the short term, the supply is actually being curtailed by China, and the prices are...
How about demand, though? How fast is demand growing?
The projections from the expert everybody refers to, Dudley Kingsnorth, his latest shows demand going from what he believes to be about 120,000 tons this year is going to go to 180,000 tons by 2015, which is fairly modest demand growth. We had a slump after the recession because everything was put on hold and car manufacturing slowed down. That was in the process of rebuilding right now, which is why the Chinese actions have upset everybody so much, because certain products, economic growth is coming back, and now the means to make it happen has suddenly been curtailed on them.
Interesting. What are the main factors driving the bull in rare earths?
The main factors are the obvious end of cheap, limitless, fairly stably priced rare earth supplies, so that anybody thinking of commercializing a technology that relies on rare earths now has to worry about security of supply. And because of what I see as the shift of economic and possibly military power from west to east, which is causing a lot of unhappiness, the rare earths have become a symbol for these trade imbalances.
You really get the sense of this bullying attitude on one hand in China, which is, they want to have their cake and eat it too. On the other hand, it's totally reasonable that a country would want to mine the minerals and use them to produce goods.
I think China has mishandled the way it has done what is a very reasonable strategy, namely get rid of its polluting operations, get rid of the illegal operations, and get control over what is a depleting resource. I do not think they quite thought it through or imagined that the Western media would focus on these rare earths, and as you said earlier, it's such a small market. What a hullabaloo for something that represents $1 to $2 billion of value of metals produced. I think they completely overestimated the public reaction and would probably handle it differently.
In the sense that they assumed it would just go by unnoticed.
That's right.
Yeah, well, we've seen this happen with other metals where investors kind of jump onto it and the media jumps onto it, and suddenly there are books being written about molybdenum, and uranium is, the great uranium bull, and all this. And to some extent, I guess this is also what's happened with rare earths. Who do you see looking at your research, and who do you expect to be first across the line?
Well, in terms of development timelines, Linus expects to be in production by the end of 2011 with its Mount Weld project. There's some question on whether the process technology they have adopted will work on a scaled-up commercial level. The next one will be Mountain Pass, Molycorp's Mountain Pass, which they hope to have back in production by the end of 2012. And then there is sort of a gap. There's really nothing happening between 2012 and 2014. 2015, 2016 is when we could expect all these major projects like Strange Lake, Bear Lodge, Nechalacho, perhaps even these smaller ones like Kippawa and Norachar come on stream as rare earth mines. So a big question is the gap in between. What does the world do for those few years in there where China has curtailed its supply and the new mines are not yet on stream? And that's something, I guess, behind the scenes they're working out, is how can we ration this limited supply of rare earths in the short term so that we don't get into a fight over access to them.
Well, you keep track of a lot of this on your website, KBFO?
KaiserBottomfish.com. There's a section called the Rare Earth Resource Center, and it's an unrestricted page, and there's a lot of information there as to who the key players are and what the rare earth sector is all about.
And of course, investors can subscribe to your newsletter as well.
Yes, I cover the whole range of Canadian listed resource companies, and it's not just rare earths, it's gold, diamonds, copper, and the new one, my latest one, scandium. And I think a year from now, you will be doing an interview with me about scandium.
You've been busy.
Very.
You've been busy. Well, I would highly encourage investors to have a look at Kaiser Bottom Fish online. And thanks for coming in and talking to us today.
Thank you, Doug.
Really appreciate that.
It's been a pleasure.
Thanks.